Hi everyone, welcome back. You're with the Lone Wolf once again. In one of my previous videos, I mentioned Laura Bates, and she's a prominent feminist in the UK. And I thought today it would be a good opportunity to review an article from a couple of months ago where she has sort of taken centre stage. So let's have a look. This is on Marie Claire. Laura Bates, misogyny is so normalised in our society that we struggle to recognise it as something extreme. And of course this article is written by a woman as well. And before I go into it, Laura Bates basically has made a career out of what it seems to be like hating on men and the alleged problems in society that they cause. Laura Bates opens up about her new book, Men Who Hate Women, and the terrifying and very real manosphere that it exposes. I'm actually tempted to order this book and rip it apart for the channel, but I honestly think it would make my nose bleed if I read it, so maybe one day. You may not have heard of the Manosphere, but once you have, you'll never be able to unhear, unsee, or forget it. You just walk away from it and ignore it and get on with your own life instead of trying to keep forging out this career where you just hate on dudes. The term refers to a vast global network of extreme misogyny and a strong opposition to feminism spreading under our noses. Operating in websites, blogs, online forums, their women-hating ideologies lead to shocking offline consequences. I can't wait to see what false dichotomies she draws up. These communities have been directly linked to rape culture and a rise in misogynistic terrorist attacks. And the manosphere is growing, with boys as young as 11 being radicalised to hate and fear women. Yet few of us know anything about this extremism, and many would question its existence. Yeah, they're being radicalised, the 11-year-old boys, but if you brainwash them in schools with feminist Marxist ideology, that's not radicalising, is it? No? Despite initially not wanting to give the manosphere the oxygen of publicity, Laura Bates felt compelled to unearth these misogynistic networks after seeing the extent of their offline power. In her groundbreaking new book, Bates goes on to expose the manosphere, its shockingly large size and influence, recruitment by radicalisation, and its devastating impact as it seeps into society, all operating under the radar. Yes, it's devastating how much it completely pervades the higher education system, right? The mainstream media, all of these big cultural institutions, the political space. Yeah, the manosphere really has penetrated all of those themes. Utter garbage. The page loads because they've got that many ads. Come on. Introducing Men Who Hate Women, From Incels to Pick-Up Artists, The Truth About Extreme Misogyny and How It Affects Us All, by Laura Bates, best-selling author and founder of the Everyday Exism project. Yeah, so she's been doing this a long time. She's been doing this, I think, since around 2013, 2014. Basically made a career out of pointing out exism wherever she thinks that it exists. And basically just to generate buzz, generate clicks, sell books. So, I mean, without the manosphere, she wouldn't have anyone to hate on and generate money selling her books. So she should at least thank them for that. Imagine a world in which a vast network of ICs and other misogynists are able to operate virtually undetected. These extremists commit deliberate terrorist attacks against women. Vulnerable teenage boys are groomed and radicalised. You don't have to imagine that world, you already live in it. Perhaps you didn't know because we don't like to talk about it, but it's time we start. MC Features editor Jenny Proudfoot sat down with Laura Bates to discuss the groundbreaking book and the urgent conversation of misogynistic extremism that it raised. Let's just see what she says here in this Instagram post. The book, published in paperback today, it traces the types of terrorism that go unnoticed, unreported and ignored, connections not made between extremist misogyny and white supremes, the radicalization of white boys which nobody's paying attention to until it's too late, the complicity of the media, big tech, politicians and public figures in smuggling extremist ideology into plain sight. How? Who's doing that? Who is doing that? It has been so frustrating this past 2 weeks to see so many of these connections missed and ignored. Perhaps if more than a fifth of front-page newspaper articles were written by women who would point them out. No one is stopping women from becoming journalists. No one. Just go for the job. Nobody's out there stopping this from happening, right? Perhaps if more than 5 of the 27 people attending cabinet were women and more than 1 was black, we'd see political action. Perhaps if more than 3% of computing jobs were held by African American women and 6% by Asian women, we see tech companies tackle the problem. Instead, we see women blamed and shamed, racism ignored, and some types of extremism nobody is talking about. Yeah, that's mainly nonsense. Talk us through the Manosphere. So you've got someone who fundamentally doesn't know what the Manosphere is, gets to provide a straw man to mainstream, well, to Marie Claire. The Manosphere is a sprawling network of blogs, forums, video platforms, private members groups and chat rooms that practice misogynistic extremism. The main communities I look at in the book are ICs, pickup artists, MRAs and men going their own way. And I'll go into the men going their own way for the purpose of this video. I don't want to drag things out too long. But this extreme, what's extreme? I'll go into the lone wolf stuff in a minute. But like, what is extreme about self-preservation? You know, what is extreme about recognizing the system doesn't really benefit you, and you're trying to exercise your own independence and self-preservation, you know, from the system. That's classed as extremism. Men going their own way are men who believe women to be so toxic and damaging that women here have to be avoided at all costs and should be cut out of their lives entirely. That's false. If she even had a cursory glimpse into the Reddits, the articles, the people on YouTube that have put content out for years, she would know that there's plenty of lone wolves that date, you know, plenty of lone wolves that date. They just don't get married or cohabit. I mean, maybe some cohabit, but they certainly don't get married. It's a stupid decision. These are men, again, we might think of as a very niche online group with few members and little offline influence. But as with all of these groups, we're actually talking about communities in the hundreds of thousands. Indeed you are, and it's the RP community just grows and grows and grows year on year. And since I've been involved with this sort of content for years, going back to like 2013, 14, I think, I've only seen it grow over time. There's people that have come and gone in the space, myself included, but there's a reason that it's persisted for so long, because there has to be an element of truth, right, in the messages, and people are finding value in it. There are groups with over 100,000 members. Huge numbers of these platforms have millions of posts, and there's a single blogger who has over 70 million views on his videos alone. So I think she's talking about Sandman. So we're actually talking about a really significant number of people whose communities have significant offline impact, and whose ideologies have been smuggled into the mainstream through semi-respectable interlocutors without us necessarily realizing it. What do you mean smuggled into the mainstream? Like, nobody teaches this stuff. That's why you have to find it on YouTube. Nobody's teaching it at schools. You know, how to read the popular culture and how to insulate yourself from being, divorced, losing half your stuff, losing child support. No one educates boys on this stuff. No one teaches this. No one teaches, boys on the dynamics of dating and how to find a good partner. It's nonsense. So to say that the ideas have been smuggled into the mainstream, I found these ideas by accident, completely by accident. Whereas the ethnicist stuff, that's come straight through the school system, through the curriculum, through the university system. It's pervasive in the politics. It controls the media and the legal authorities. It has the guns. It has the weapons. So, our group is the one that has withdrawn and has sort of left and gone off on its own and is looking after itself and not harming anything. Yes, there have been some very bad actors in the space, people that have done terrible things. Whether they were in the Men Going Their Own Way group, I don't know. And they should be condemned. But what she's doing is just labelling an entire group. If you put out an article like this on any other theme, whether it was like religious theme, cultural theme, creed, you would be lambasted. But she gets to do it because it's men. She's allowed to just shred entire communities of people. Instead of querying why the men are doing it, and why they subscribe to these beliefs, what's happened to them, what they've seen. Here she is just talking garbage, smearing an entire community. I think she's married as well, so some guy actually decided to marry her, which, I mean, God bless him. Why is misogynistic extremism still not being taken seriously? Get rid of this crap. I think there's a number of reasons. The first is that it's a relatively emerging threat in terms of the first is that it's a relatively emerging threat. People are failing to join the dots and make the connections between them. And I think a big part of it is that misogyny is so normalised in our society that we really struggle to recognise this as something extreme. We are so used to women being ended by men. One woman is ended on average every 3 days by a male current or former partner in the UK. That is literally the backdrop to our daily life. So I think we struggle to see these as atrocities, and it is a huge blind spot. It's also because of who often commits these offences. Educated white men, and so the criminal justice system finds excuses for them. Look at the recent Georgia shooter, for example. Police officer giving a press conference explained he was having a bad day after he had ended 8 people, including 6 Asian women. The way in which we collectively excuse, condone, normalise and ignore these white men when they commit mass shootings and atrocities really hampers us as a society in tackling the problem. And all of those instances are to be absolutely condemned. But when there's, these, if you look at men, they're the overwhelming number of workplace deaths, the overwhelming number of self-terminations, the overwhelming number of combat deaths, the overwhelming number of people put into jail, and incarcerations, the assaults that happen in jail, overwhelmingly men. Overwhelming number of homeless are men. It's you're completely ignoring all of these issues. So she's only looking at it through the prism of her own understanding and her own position as a woman in the West. If she was anywhere else, if she was out in the Middle East, she wouldn't last a day. How much were you aware of going in? I was aware of these communities because as a woman writing on the internet about ethnicist issues, these men come to you. I don't know why they do. It's I certainly wouldn't advise any of my viewers to go and send her stuff and criticise and harass. I certainly wouldn't advise them to do that. So I've been aware of them for some time, but there was an argument in ethnicist circles that we shouldn't give them the oxygen of publicity, and that was something that I largely agreed with. So for a long time it just wasn't something that I really spoke about publicly. What changed my mind was the recognition that these groups actually have a lot of offline power. We're talking about a very established network here, with millions of views and followers, with hundreds of thousands of members. They were doing pretty well without the oxygen of publicity, and they are they were beginning to commit an increasing number of attacks. Yeah, well, that guy, no idea what that guy was up to, what group he was in, but I don't think he was anything like me, personally. What prompted this sudden realisation? I started to spend a lot of time in schools. I would visit on average 2 schools a week. So in the last 9 years, I've spoken with tens of thousands of students and visited hundreds of schools. Those aren't always easy conversations, and there was always some resistance, awkwardness and anxiety around it. But in the last couple of years, there was a very marked and dramatic shift in the responses from teenage boys. They were coming to the conversation already firmly made up. They hated effenism. They believed that I, as an effenist, was a man-hating bee. They really believed that there was an effenist conspiracy stacked against them at the heart of government, and that white men are the real victims of today's society. They had been fed false information. What's false? What's false? You can't just call these claims false without providing any sort of evidence. You're saying these boys have got their mind made up, but what's annoyed you is that they've questioned you. Now, if I'm raising a child, I'm going to tell them that they should query everything, they should question everything. That's called critical thinking. And it's something that universities used to be really very fond of, and they used to be the bastions of critical thinking, and they're not anymore. That's Jordan Peterson. So she's saying that this generation of teenage boys is being radicalised and nobody has any idea that it's even happening. Or maybe they've had first-hand experience of, maybe their dad being divorced from their mum, and they've seen that it's wrecked their dad's life. Maybe that might have happened. Yeah, so she gets to create a straw man, engineer an enemy. She constantly needs an enemy. It's like, as far as progress that has been made with the equal rights, they constantly need an enemy. It's like the American military. The Soviet Union's gone, so we constantly need an enemy. We need China, or we need Russia. We need a threat. We need a terror group. We constantly need the boogeyman. It's like 1984. It's like constantly having it's I forget the name of the Emmanuel Goldstein. We need him, someone to blame for all of our woes. Just skipped out some of that. Something that surprised me was the extent to which the groups prey on vulnerability. The really tragic thing is that many of the young men who are driven to these websites are suffering. They are suffering from the traditionally prescribed societal strictures of masculinity and what it means to perform that. The irony is that, what evidence do you have for that? Have you asked any of them? The irony is that male mental health as a crisis needs to be tackled. Yeah, we can agree on that. Something that the Manosphere will claim to believe is very important, but actually it suits them for men to continue suffering. I can't think of anybody in this space that would want men to continue suffering. Absolutely none. Can't think of anybody that would want that to happen. They want men not to be suffering. They want men to be strong and powerful and courageous and virtuous. I would argue that you're projecting here in your analysis. You need the Manosphere to exist so that it's this perpetual enemy, this perpetual boogeyman. They continue to tell men you have to be powerful, violent, and in control of your woman. That's the only way for a man to be successful. I've never seen that. I've never seen that written anywhere. Certainly, at least not in the men going their own way areas of the space, or certainly in my. And that's nothing. It's nothing that I would subscribe to. They really double down on exactly the kind of messaging that is harming men in the first place. And if we could provide boys with offline spaces to explore some of the anxieties, fears, and frustrations that often sends them into the arms of these communities, then that would be a really good way to offset power. It can't be a coincidence that these communities have risen so sharply in their influence and success at grooming young people at the same time that we've seen a massive decline in funding for youth services. Hundreds of youth centres have been forced to shut their doors, and boys don't have that same opportunity offline to create a sense of community, purpose, belonging and brotherhood. That's what these communities are offering them. Yeah, I'll agree on that as well. There is a sense that a united sense of purpose and belonging and community in this space. And I mean, a lot of these channels certainly have helped me as a young man anyway, in my early 20s, coming through this space. Certainly helped me drive towards career goals and focus my energy. It's been invaluable for that. But We've clearly been dangerously complacent by underestimating the manosphere. How much are online ideas leading to offline action? I've traced over 100 deaths or serious injuries to massacres carried out in the last 10 years alone by men explicitly involved in these ideologies, but it's also happening in a more day-to-day sense, as men who are coming into contact with these ideas online are having an impact on their female peers. Okay, so again, yeah, you're tarnishing an entire group. Can't bring myself to read the rest of this passage. If you wrote an article like this about Islam and traced all of the attacks, the Islamic attacks around the world, especially in the West, and blamed it on an ideology like that, this article wouldn't even be printed. And that's a fact. It's bizarre logic. Despite its power, the Manosphere appears to be virtually unheard of even by government. So how's that power then? That's very much the case. I interviewed and contacted some very high-level counter-terror organisations for the book, and it was very notable. In one particular case, I used the word IC, and there was a long pause at the other end of the line before they said, "Sorry, could you spell it?" It's definitely not on the radar. There's a US Government Accountability Office report. So she's equating our sort of space with terror, for having a functioning brain and an independent mind. Oh, it beggars belief. It includes this, US Government Accountability Office report literally auditing their response to all different kinds of terrorism. It includes people with extreme views on federal ownership of land and people with extreme views on animal rights, but there's not a word in there about gender, male supremacy, or inceldom. And in the period of the report, there were 3 massacres carried out by IS. Blah, blah, blah. Does it end yet? Again, she's talking about the ending of women as a commonplace and normalised crime that everyone just accepts, which, yeah, again, how many men are killed every year? Like, self-terminate. Not heard that. That's she hasn't even mentioned it. So she actually created a male alter ego to enter the Manosphere undercover. Alex was a disillusioned young white guy who wasn't particularly successful, didn't have very many friends, and hadn't had much romantic success. He was pretty into gaming and bodybuilding, and he hung out in online forums. I very deliberately didn't take him straight into the Manosphere because I think a common misconception is that boys won't come across this stuff if they don't go looking for it. And with Alex, I wanted to show and really experience the slow, slippery slope that can take you there. So he was on YouTube watching a gaming video when suddenly the algorithm recommended a video to him about the gender pay gap being a myth, which it is. And then from there, he was immediately led onto a video of an feminist being destroyed in an argument by an MRA. From there was a video about men going their own way and whether he realised that the vast majority of men who think their fathers in the UK are actually cuckolds, being forced to raise illegitimate children. From there, he was given a link to a PUA, where suddenly he's been given all these techniques on how to force women into having bedroom fun with him. When that didn't necessarily work, he found himself drawn into a website where they were furious with PUAs for suggesting that you can get women to have bedroom fun with you because women are blah, blah, blah. What did you discover through Alex? Oh, it's a slippery slope. It's, blah, blah, blah. If you can actually bring yourself to read this article, guys, I can already feel my brain turning to mush, so. Many women are afraid to speak out against these groups. Some of the women whose stories I include in the book have literally had to leave their jobs, their homes, etc. Yeah, not like the men who've been divorced and kicked out of their own homes that they've paid for. They've had their lives completely turned upside down because of the sheer power of these networks to commit mass harassment. Women like Diane Abbott. No, Diane Abbott got... she basically just got criticism, as far as I'm aware. I know she did get some hate, but a lot of it was because she was a useless politician. Yeah, just to sum up then, guys, I'm not going to read any more. She says, I hope that people will have their eyes open to a real threat that we all need to play a part in addressing. I hope it will have an impact on policymakers. I hope that it will lead to better training and support for teachers in recognising this as an emerging form of radicalisation. I hope that parents will feel empowered to be able to have important conversations with their children to support them better. Now, I would hope that parents encourage their children to think critically and develop their own independence of thought and make their own minds up on ideas and weigh it up, as opposed to trying to indoctrinate them with your own ideology. This is a threat that we haven't really recognised before, that we really need to act on now before it's too late. Well, yeah, irrespective of what you think, I'll just be doing my own thing, and so will many, many, many others, and you can't do a damn thing about it. Thanks for listening, guys. Check out the article if you have the mental fortitude, and I'll see you next time.